Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview. In this episode, we are talking with Anton Lissone, CTO at SAI Global. SAI Global is a leading provider of integrated risk management solution, assurance, and property services. SAI Global helps organizations protect their brands by proactively managing risk to achieve business excellence, growth, sustainability, and trust. Anton, welcome to our show today.
Thank you, Boris.
Anton, I really appreciate your time and look forward to our conversation today. Could you tell us a short story about your company, SAI Global, and what are you guys up to these days?
Well, as you mentioned, SAI Global, the name originally comes from Standards Australia Institute. But I guess we'll be primarily talking about one of the divisions within SAI Global today, which is the Risk and Learning division. And in the Risk and Learning division, we really have a wide product portfolio that covers all kinds of use cases in the GRC or integrated risk management use cases, combined with ethics and compliance learning. So that is a combination of software, services, e-learning, and content, both SaaS as well as on-prem, and associated implementation services and advisory services to help our customers on their GRC journey. So that's what we're all about.
Oh. So what actually SAI Global does in relation to risk audit management, and what is your best type of or ideal customer? And could you tell us perhaps how are you different from other providers in this space?
Okay, well, obviously the GRC stands for Governance, Risk and Compliance. It's a wide, broad container verb that is used to cover a lot of different use cases in that space. The ones that you mentioned, risk management and audit, are two important ones together with internal control. And then there's other areas like business continuity management, vendor risk management, policy management, and many others that are normally looked at when you look at GRC solutions. Specifically to risk management and internal audit, there's a few different angles that we cover from a risk management perspective. We have, for instance, pretty advanced environmental health and safety software that allows you to do operational risk management, primarily for health and safety companies like plants, manufacturing organizations, mining companies, etc. So that's one angle. The other angle is operational risk management, which is for financial services, which is a slightly different angle because we're talking about financial services risks, capital modeling for solvency requirements, as well as value at risk calculations and those types of risk management principles. And then there's also a lot of other risks like IT risk management, where we talk about business continuity management or operational resilience, vendor risk management or third-party risk, which we also hear in the financial services space. So it's pretty broad. And then if you look at audit, audit typically covers similar use cases, but then obviously as a third line of defense. So when we look at internal control, which is typically a second line of defense function, then audit would do a third line inspection on top of the result done by the second line for internal control testing, for instance. So that's one way of looking at audit. We also have a lot of customers that do very advanced corporate audits or audit management, which includes the entire cycle from annual audit planning, documenting audit universes, creating the actual audit engagements, time recording, time writing, pretty much anything that is key to a day in the life of any given auditor in an organization. When you ask me the question about what customers do you serve, well, when you look at audit, you can serve a small audit shop that has 5 auditors, and they primarily do, let's say, inspections at Burger King, which is a lot of different locations at Burger King or any other fast food restaurant. They go through that inspection list and they make sure that everything that they need to check quarterly is done within that certain franchise. So that's let's say the simplistic end of auditing. The more complicated end of auditing is we have a large bank that has 2,000 auditors globally, working from different regions in different countries. Certain auditors have are specialized in credit risks, others are specialized in market risk. And the way they determine what to audit is not just frequently looking at the branch office. They do it based on a risk-based approach and then determine what to cover. They do specific procedures when they get to a branch office to look at a particular process. They cover the actual narratives of that process. Then they determine what the scope and the controls of the audit are to actually attest it. And do special engagements that they've received from the board. So those are very different ways of doing audit. One is let's say, audit controls or just inspections. On the other hand, is really the entire audit management process. So we cover with our software pretty much the capability for both sides of the coin. Customers can start small, they can grow into large. They can use our software for one specific use case in audit, not using all of the other bells and whistles, but decide to turn that on at a later point in time. So we can grow with our software offering with the maturity or the use cases that the customer wants to further automate in this age. And I guess the same applies to risk management. There are some companies that see risk management as, if you look at enterprise risk management, they do quarterly assessments at the board, they identify risks, they put them on the heat map, they create a set of risk mitigating actions, and then they want to follow those through a workflow, and that's what they do for risk management. And then on the opposite side, if you look at, for instance, banks, they document very rigorously their process narratives, the internal risks that they have, and then they document the controls associated to those processes. They do risk and control self-assessments pretty much every month. That rolls up in a risk aggregation, which then drives the risk posture, and that then somehow is fed into the model for capital calculation for solvency to determine how much we actually need to retain on the balance sheet, etc., which is much more complicated, much more elaborate process. They also tie historic loss registration and recovery registration to actually do value at risk simulations or Monte Carlo simulations, etc. So that's the other side of the spectrum. So also in risk management, there's simplistic, pretty straightforward use cases, 5 users just doing heat maps every quarter, and very complicated use cases doing continuous risk assessments. And then even further down the line, there's now companies starting to do data analytics where instead of saying, let's do RCSAs every month, we're going to just take in feeds from all across the organization, emerging risks, actual incidents, audit findings that are being raised, news feeds, etc. And then based on all of those data points, we determine when do we think our residual risk rating or our inherent risk rating needs to be adjusted. And then as we go along, as we identify those types of data points, update the risk assessments and see if we need to do something else, which is more continuous. That's also starting to happen, which is even more complicated because you have to get all of this data, integrate with all kinds of external systems. In some cases, they even use artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to make it smarter and better. So that's, again, on the other side of the spectrum. So it's very broad, and we can tailor for the simple use case and the complicated use cases. And for all the other use cases, besides risk and audit, I think it's a similar story. It moves from simplistic to more complicated to data-driven, and then to some degree machine learning and artificial intelligence potentially. But they all have a nature that they start to grow more data, more integrations with other systems. They move away from just objective to more substantive by taking into account more data points for certain claims around effectiveness or risk levels. So that's really the entire product portfolio and how we can help those customers.
Well, so you have a lot on your plate. You are a CTO. You're a very young person, so it's a lot the work to do. So I wonder, in many industries, COVID-19 has accelerated the move to digital transformation. As Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella put it, we saw 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. What changes are you seeing in the market, especially now in this COVID situation? Can you tell us perhaps how your clients are impacted by this crisis and what organizations will need to do in order to adapt?
So I think there's 2 very immediate use cases. Obviously, one is our operational resilience programs or our business continuity management solutions. Now all of a sudden people see that they need to be more resilient. What do we do to work from home? What are the problems that we run into if all of a sudden a large workforce works from home? Is our VPN connectivity up to it, etc.? Is the bandwidth good enough? So there's a lot of things in operational resilience that people are now starting to ask questions around to be better prepared the next time when a certain crisis hits, whether that's COVID or something else is less relevant. So there's a renewed interest in business continuity management and operational resilience. Also on the environmental health and safety side, obviously, there's a lot of need for customers now to start to record what happens in office locations, who got ill, who did not get ill, are people sick, did they get COVID or did they get something else, and try to figure out how do we create a program to get people back to the office in a safe manner. And then obviously that leads to change and adjustments in policies where our policy management solutions come in to make sure that people are aware of the new policies, that they sign off on the policies, and combined with our learning, we can then train them and explain them how do you behave in the workplace now that there's the potential and we have the 1.5 meter or 2 meter rule, etc. So that whole chain, that's primarily where we've seen most of the changes happening today. I think the fallout of this whole COVID crisis will probably show that there's more organizations which haven't been resilient, didn't have enough capital saved up to get through this crisis, or companies that are now trying to close offices. Obviously, that will have a huge impact overall on our economy, as well as how do people look at risk and risk management and internal control. If people more permanently work from home, the way you implement certain controls is going to be slightly different, and you want them to be more, let's say, depending on the physical location of where somebody's working, it's going to be more depending on how you work, the devices that you use, and remote working and working from home. So I think some of that starts to come now. Our customers are obviously starting to ask questions around what can you do here, what can you do there, but then we'll obviously have a delay between COVID starting, COVID ending potentially, and then now we get back to normal. What are the things that we've learned that we need to adjust? The focus now is primarily on operational resilience and getting through this crisis, which for many also has significant financial impacts. And so I think we are in a fortunate position that we have such a wide product and services portfolio that anywhere in that cycle of start to peak of Corona and going down and afterwards, we're well organized and we have products and services that can help customers get through that situation at any point in that curve and at any point where they are with their programs around tackling this COVID crisis. I think even longer term, and this is not only relates to us, but as more companies try to adapt systems, not just their GRC systems to be more electronic, to be more automated, to be less people intense or depending on people, to have better decision support, etc. Obviously, they will go through a digital transformation, right? Like they go with digital transformation on the GRC end, they will also go through more digital transformation, as the Microsoft CEO said, on their primary operating systems, their ERPs, etc. But as those systems become more digital, also the risks that occur will change slightly in nature, because risks associated to it, digital business processes or cybersecurity, are very different from risks associated with people-intense, process-driven work. So there will be an update to how people behave, on how the controls are documented, how the controls are executed, including what type of data do they actually cover, how can they evidence that those controls are effective, which will then again change the opportunity for us to actually be able to do more things like continuous monitoring, continuous auditing, because all of the data now all of a sudden is available. We can use advanced techniques like process mining to further optimize certain second line functions to determine, is this an effective way of doing a vendor onboarding? Is this an effective way of writing a new policy? By providing them all of the tools that go with the data that we're gathering from those primary systems. So I think there's massive change, but the focus right now is on what can we do now to stay ahead of this COVID situation. And then after that, when people look back and they've changed their process and they drive further digital transformation, there will be other things that will happen that we need to adapt to. And then listen, I appreciate your note of me being young and the CTO of a large organization, but don't forget, we have so many different products. We obviously have rockstar product managers that work with us, and we have really good experts that know the EHS area very well. We have the experts that know healthcare very well, and then we have experts which know financial services really well. So I'm fortunate enough to work with them every single day to get this done. Not just me.
Fantastic. So, Anton, I'd like to ask you your personal opinion. What is a commonly held belief as it relates to risk management and audit that you personally disagree with? Or what is one common myth about risk management that you want to debunk?
Well, there's a few. There's different angles to look at it. If I go back all the way back in my career, I actually started at KPMG working on continuous auditing. When I joined, this is almost, I don't even know how long, 16 years ago, I was an auditor at large Dutch multinationals to look at their financial books, as well as the systems that relate to control of financial reporting. And what struck me then was that there's a lot of manual work being done by auditors. And there's a lot of ways to do this better. Instead of doing reasonable assurance, you could to some degree get absolute assurance by not looking at sample sizes, but looking at the entire population. Data, technology, machine learning, but also computer-assisted audit techniques, as we called them in the past, have evolved drastically, that this can be done better. If you then look at how far did we get from that seed initiation on doing continuous monitoring and continuous auditing, and how companies today, at any given size, actually apply it in their business, it is very little. And I think I'm very passionate about this topic because many times when you try to show what is the return on investment on doing continuous auditing and continuous monitoring, it's expensive implementations because it's tying systems together, combining data from different sources, and then having an opinion about effectiveness. But if you do this, it actually takes a lot of work away from people in the first line and second line. And it is also not just monitoring, it actually becomes a risk mitigating measure, because you can actually get alerts very early on in the process, which actually reduce the corrections that you need to take afterwards. It can actually prevent people from making particular mistakes, etc. So I think we've been trying to sell it at SAI Global for quite some time now. And we actually have customers that do it, but I think there's so much to gain in this market by doing more data-driven compliance in general, but specifically continuous monitoring and continuous auditing. And then another topic that I think, if you read average LinkedIn posts lately about risk experts or non-risk experts, there's always this debate about two topics. One is the heat map actually a useful way to do risk management? Mm-hmm. And then there's always these discussions about, yes, it's right, no, it's not right. But what people tend to forget is that this really depends on the person that wants to do risk management. There's people that say heat maps are fundamentally wrong because it's qualitative and people overestimate or underestimate risk and they can't really know where to put it in a square. But it is a way of prioritizing your actions. Whether that's entirely accurate or not, you have to start somewhere. Some companies are not mature enough to do everything based on quantitative risk analysis, project risk analysis with correlations, etc. Right? So there is a right answer for every organization and every cycle of their maturity. Sometimes it is as simple as just working with heat maps. Sometimes it is as complicated as doing correlated risk assessments with quantification. The only thing that is really relevant is pick the right way to start, because we have done implementations where we've done risk correlations and calculations where their maturity wasn't really up to that level, but you still push a system that does that, it will not be a successful implementation. Right? So what you deliver, ranging from the simple risk management solution to the complex risk management solution, really has to match with the maturity of the customer. And often they overestimate their maturity. So you have to be very cautious about just start somewhere with something that you know can be a success, learn from that, and then evolve and make it bigger. Which takes us slightly to the last point. There's this debate about IRM GRC and GRC applications being old and IRM applications being new. Every software goes through a life cycle where somebody that's immature or very mature, or a market that doesn't really have defined boundaries of what is a GRC platform or risk management platform supposed to do, goes through people that think they know, or external consultants like Big Four that help. Every time when they write methodology, it is slightly different because it's tailored towards a specific organization. That means that in the past, a lot of these software platforms like ours needed to be able to be very flexible and cover all of that capability. But it also means you get pretty complicated software and that implementation times can be pretty long. On the other side of the spectrum, we now see companies that have gone through this 2 or 3 times or have learned from others and peers. And their preference really is, I don't want to go through a lengthy implementation. I just want somebody that tells me this is how you're supposed to do it. This will get me 80% there. Let me do that for the first year, and then we'll see where the ship lands and if we need to evolve this further and make it more complicated. Which is really where the market is going today. So most of the RFPs today, the value of the revenue on the actual subscription of the software versus how much money do they want to spend on implementation services has dramatically shifted in the past 2 years. I think part of this also has to do with COVID, because when people now do investments, their ROI needs to be much more clear and they want to have business value pretty quickly, not after 6 months of implementation. So a lot of the debates about, again on LinkedIn and other media are about, is it this old-fashioned software or this new-fashioned software? That's not really the question. The question is, why is there a difference and what type of software is suited for what type of buyer? Because we still sell to both. right? We still sell to customers that say, Anton, give me business continuity management live in 3 days. We also have customers that say, no, business continuity management for us is really complicated because we have 200 factories across the globe and safety instructions and policies are very different. There's different people, different training, different language, and their implementations are obviously more complicated. So you can't just force that 3-day implementation standard out-of-the-box product on a company that has much more needs. It is actually both, right? So that's also where our organization comes in well, because we can actually tailor to both types of customers using the same technology, and that also allows them to, if they decide to start with something simple, quick value, it can still evolve into that other piece, which is more tailored, more fit, or and more integrated to their existing systems.
Okay, interesting.
So those are, I think, those are things that people debate a lot about, but they forget about what is the actual underlying arguments that why is it a relevant discussion, and they get hung up on whether it's a heat map or not, which is not really relevant in my opinion.
Okay, so I wonder, what tips do you have for risk managers to help their organizations to stay on the course during this crisis? For example, what something that they should start doing right now that they are not doing currently, or perhaps another way around, what they should stop doing that not doing currently? This is just small tips, not just big.
No, I think we've went through this obviously ourselves as a global company as well. Is that risk management where normally you implement the software, you're not in a crisis, right? And you shouldn't confuse crisis management going through a rough period, either COVID or a security incident or something else that has occurred. The behavior that you show there is very different from being a risk manager on the front line saying, what can go wrong? How should I prepare for it to actually go wrong? Once something actually goes wrong, there's a lot of things that are different from how you anticipated it before it actually went wrong, right? So don't stick to what you've don't stick to what you've written down in your risk matrix or in your RCM and here are the controls that we need to execute. Go into crisis mode, figure out how to solve it now, reassess the situation, reevaluate what's in the risk framework, whether that's still relevant, and do this ongoing. And obviously make sure that you do a retrospective afterwards. Because while you're in the situation, you might make assumptions or adjustments to the way you operate to keep your head above water or stay ahead of the risk. But they might not have necessarily been the most effective way to do it. So afterwards, always do a retrospective where you figure out, did we respond correctly? Yes or no? Was this the most effective way to do it? And then what do we need to change in our risk frameworks to be better prepared for the next time? So that's one way of looking at it. I think also what this has shown us, and there's more incidents in history that has shown this, is that we can't prevent or we can't predict black swans. I mean, obviously there's videos on the internet where Bill Gates said 10 years ago that we would have a pandemic pretty much this century, and that we would be bad prepared. And I guess that has come to fruition. But nobody really takes that into account when modeling black swans and then trying to figure out how do we prepare for this. So when you look at risk management, some of it is also trying to deal with the unknown and the uncertain. You can't fix everything by just implementing controls. You also have to make sure that part of risk management means knowing that certain things are not known upfront. So that a mitigating measure might be that you can scale up quickly and quickly create a crisis response team to solve particular problems. It's not just about the preventive nature, it's as much about the corrective nature and afterwards, and the regressions that you can apply to reducing your risks. So I think that's something that has taught many risk managers over the past period.
All right, okay. So what we should expect from you guys in the future as in terms of product services and maybe looking broadly in your industry, what are the major trends, if you can say in a few words?
Yeah, I think I've touched upon the most important ones already. The major trends go from complicated, expensive to implement software entirely bespoke to more market standardized SaaS solutions which have quick value and are ultimately at the lower total cost of ownership, which is also what our roadmap is aligned to, right? With things like fast starts that we're launching or SaaS solutions that are up and running in 3 days. You just get that out of the box. That's one thing to look at. The second thing is that in the GRC space is such a broad area with solutions. There's companies that are buying a point solution just for business continuity management or just for vendor risk management. but ultimately 2 years or 3 years down the line, when they get the value from such an application and they've learned from it, they might want to add something onto it, like policy management or internal control, and not have another application do the same thing. Right? They just want to, like on the App Store on your iPhone, switch on, now I want to do risk management, now I want to do policy management, now I want to do audits or inspections. And they want that to be quickly available at that point, sweating the assets that they already have, which is the investment in the platform that they've done. So again, we are continuously working on making sure that all of those use cases, and we have about 20 today, can be covered on the same vendor and the same services that we provide, which is what we do today. And I think this will continue to grow. And then the maturity of what we need to cover, a lot of companies, even in the GRC space, they talk about artificial intelligence and natural language processing and machine learning. And this is how marketing works, right? You have to throw in some buzzwords to sound credible and show that you have thought leadership. But the point is, there are really valuable things in those technologies that can actually help you, but it will only help you if you find the nail to hit the hammer with. So what are the practical use cases that are causing pain in your day-to-day business, in your decision-making that you can do better or faster based on those modern techniques, which is also why we're working on. And so let me give you an example. We are working with large banks. They're getting 100 or 200 regulatory updates every single week. And then phase one would be, can I get those updates in a harmonized format so that I can push them through a workflow? Sure, you can do that. After you've done that for half a year, you find out that from a certain regulator or about a certain topic or about a certain market, that particular workflow should be handled by this person because he's a subject matter expert, right? You can either do that by business tools or you can have the system learn by itself because this is simply how the workflows went in the past half year. So we can now predict what is the upcoming workflow for an incoming regulatory change. Who is really the expert best equipped to handle that particular question? Now, if you take that even further, when it lands on the desk of that person, for instance, this is something about credit risk, that person will well then determine, does this regulatory change have an impact on my policies? What policies do I have for credit risks or related to money laundering or to anti-terrorism financing, etc.? So today, they bind those regulatory notifications to such a policy manually, and then somebody goes into the policy to determine which particular section of my policy needs to be updated. This can be supported by natural language processing, right? We can actually match text from a regulator to certain sections and imperative sentences in regulatory text as well as in policies. So when it lands on that desk automatically of that person through prediction, you can also tell that person, here are the 5 sections or the 5 articles in your internal policies that we most likely think you need to update, right? And then trigger the workflow. So there's real tangible benefits in applying modern techniques, but it's for every company to figure out where can we provide that value. And obviously we bake that into the product, but we're still trying to figure out where our customers are experiencing more pain, where can we help them with some of this stuff. So that's also an important factor to take into account when looking at towards the future. So these are some of the major trends in the GRC market that we see today. And then another trend is that learning, right? We all know that if you do cyber, everyone in the organization gets a security awareness training once a year, right? And you go through a bunch of questions, and there might be an email in it, and you have to click on 5 pieces of the email that you typically look at to determine if it's spear phishing or not. Is that really effective? And in the past, for regulators, it was good enough to say, look, everybody did the training and they signed off on it. Hence, we did our best to make sure that we didn't finance terrorism or that insider trading did not occur. But that's not enough anymore, right? Regulators are now asking to show them, did you actually change the behavior of people with regards to interacting with government officials? And showing that they just did a course once a year is not going to be enough to show that you changed their behavior. So where this becomes really interesting is that data that we capture in our GRC systems and in our integrated risk management systems can actually help to prove that the training, but also the behavior of the people based on the training have changed. And that certain decisions that we support with our GRC applications can actually drive behavior of people while interacting with those third parties. So we think there's a massive market for integrating ethics and compliance learning and training as well as risk management applications to also cover the human risk factor and actually be able to substantiate to a regulator or to any other interesting party that you've been able to affect the behavior of people towards the reduction of the human risk. So I think that's probably the last biggest trend that we see in this market today.
Yeah, interesting. So, from our own perspective as a global risk community, what would you suggest? How we can contribute to the process of better understanding of this complex world of risk management?
That's a good question. I think there should be more interaction between, and let's keep it close to us, but more interactions between users and users of a GRC platform. GRC platforms are just a tool, right? And there's a saying, a fool with a tool is still a fool. The value that you get from a tool is directly correlated with the intelligence of people working with the tool, what they put into the tool, what they take out of the tool, and what they do with the stuff that they take out of the tool, right? And what we see in our market is that there are so many different applications, so many different people have worked on different GRC applications, or even different ways of doing things, that there's a lot of things that they can learn from each other. So we're trying to bring customers together to talk to each other. What works for you? What works for us? Can we learn from each other? Can we adapt our processes? That is also fundamental in trying to figure out if we're starting to sell these standard SaaS solutions that risk management for a bank, tier 2, this is how you do it, starts with them agreeing on what that common denominator is. It doesn't start with us providing a software that says this is how you do it, because even we base it on all the implementations that we've done. So if we can find 50 banks that do it the same way, I can sell that same software to 50 banks, and they're all benefited from it because it's a standard software product at that point in time. So we bring them together, we want them to talk more, share more, and a lot of the conversations are about the actual risk, and I get that, because the risks and the subject matter expertise about the risks at hand at that point in time is very important. But if we want to make these GRC systems more valuable and more successful in their implementation and driving behavior, it also it's also important that more people start to share their experience with these applications and how they can be better tailored to actually facilitate their day-to-day job.
Okay. So last question, to summarize, if someone who is listening to this interview would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would it be?
Well, that's easy. One, SAI Global software is the best GRC software in the world. Yes, I know I'm biased, but I still think that's true. No, but seriously, what do I want them to take away with? It's funny, everyone wants to get to business value quickly, right? And especially now, budgets are limited, and we have to show that there's an ROI within a short period to actually do or make a buying decision on software or implementation services. And we want to do that with the customer. Every conversation that we have starts with, yes, we want to have a standard, yes, we want to have a best practice, and yes, we want to do it agile. But it always ends with, yes, but I have these 400 must-haves that also must be done. Those two things, they collide, right? There is a way to divvy up the 400 into 3 different phases and start with phase 1. Make it a success, learn from it, get the value, and then do phase 2. So for all those customers out there that are looking for a massive GRC journey, and there are still a lot of RFPs in the market that really show very big projects, stick to smaller deliverables, get value quickly, get it into the hands of the users, and have them evolve with the software. Because how they work with the software is equally as important as what the software does. And spending 6 months trying to implement something and then have users touch it, the chances that you'll actually miss what you're trying to accomplish are pretty big at that point in time.
Okay.
So I think that's the biggest factor to contributing to success with implementing our software.
Okay, Anton, thank you for your time, and I wish you and your guys at SAI Global to grow your company and become a world leader in this GRC software.
Yeah, thank you very much for the time, Boris. I'm looking forward to the next time.
Thank you.